I saw an interview with a guy that basically imports products. He said for a container, it used to cost around $5,000 or so. His container shipping cost now is about $25,000. So just like these dramatic increases to get products from overseas here to the U.S. so you can buy it. And then there's the other factor known as inflation. Now, I used to be a financial planner, so these like economic things are some things that I've dealt with in the 30-kilogram sandbag, which is very good. We also have Hogan's buffet. I'm very hungry today, Hogan. I don't blame you. Look at the state of that food, Hogan. What are we feeding you? Speak of the devil. Here he is, head of security. Head security, Mr. Hogan. Hoagie. No sleeping on the job, my boy. So, you may have seen our Instagram recently, or my Instagram, our Instagram, the Shred Instagram, whereby we teased maybe to sell their training, sell their devices, you know, whatever it may be. So, this is how, the only way I can fit it into my schedule. So, that said, we're going to talk about hip thrusters and general glute development. Hopefully a little bit more time on glute development than this and hip thrusters. But hip thrusters, I actually love them. I know I just said we're going to diss them, but I love them. It's a great QA. So, ritual spine, hitting the spinal stabilizers, I hit it correctly, firing all the way through, arms are a little bit activated as well, glutes are firing hard. Now, glutes may be firing hard as soon as I put 3, 4, 5, 800 pounds, whatever on here, okay? But you're never going to get that full hip extension. Boom. It's going to be, even if you think you're all the way like this, you're not. I mean, there's a significant amount of leverage that comes into getting that block out in here. And through the motion, my belief is, unless you're firing through that, turn all the way through. Deep, keep those hips deep. So, so this guy has no horse reference, it's another reference. So anyway, here we're down, boom, through. Again, have to focus all the way at the top, all the way through. Squeezing my, twisting the floor apart here. These glutes are firing hard right now, just standing here in this position. So, we're going to do a few reps of these bitches on concrete.
Get specific advice on injuries that maybe they have or maybe their clients have and so on. So it's been a nice reach back to have where you can get some additional support, some additional expertise from somebody with more experience. And relevant to that, he's had, I guess, a number of recurring questions, recurring topics that continue to come up in the community and otherwise. And as a result of that, we thought it would be a good idea to
work in that area, looking at your athletes. Mike, I know you released a recent podcast talking about some exploratory areas for you on a dynamic workload management system. And Dr. Soya, I know that this is something that you actively do with your lifters, like helping them to set like targets for what they should be doing and not exceeding the tippy tops. So I'm curious to hear what your perspectives are on helping people to sort of govern their rate of gain a bit.
If you want, Mike, I'd actually love to hear yours first, and then I'll go into mine a little bit here.
Sure. So, incidentally, kind of born out of the last story I told about kind of things going too well and then the wheels falling off. There's like one particular scenario that comes to mind for me, kind of on the tail end of that scenario is kind of
To a weight range. I look at previous week's performance. I'm like, okay, here is your bottom end that I expect you to be at, and here's the top end, so we're not really exceeding a certain threshold here. It just kind of puts a little bit of a break on things. And I'll usually let these things ride out for a good 4 or 5 weeks if people are doing really well with it. And at that point, I'm like, all right, I think you've gotten enough out of this. Let's take a little breather, switch gears, come back. Things I look at first. If we change one of those factors, whether it's hand position for the bench press or the squat or even the deadlift, and the rare event that you might want to change that, bar position on the squat, bar placement when you go to put the bar on the chest, deadlift stance, etc. if we can change one of those and reduce pain by a significant enough margin, that's one of the first things I like to target, because then we could again make the least amount of bad. And so it's tough to convince one of these people that you need to somehow break that loop. And you don't necessarily have to, per se. If you're pretty okay with committing that kind of time to doing those things, it's not going to necessarily harm you beyond just maybe creating a sense of fragility and inability to train if I don't do these things. But beyond that, it's not going to create harm. That's always kind of a caveat to this stuff. Yeah.
The results, I want to say, Terry's one of the reasons I became as good as I did. You know, he was the man to kind of get to, and his level just kept getting higher, so it forced me to get higher as well. And we've had some great battles over the years. Some I'm sure I've forgotten about some of them, but some I do remember, obviously. I think I'm going to do okay with this.
You should do better than okay. So just a quick reminder of the rules then. We're going to look at competitions where you and Terry were both in there for full.
Yeah, amazing achievement for me to get to the final that year. It was my first final, and if I'm totally honest, I sort of gave everything in the heats, and I was just happy to be in the final.
Yeah.
I think I came ninth in the final. I had a couple of events that I did all right on, but I remember Sven Carlson saying to me, "You can't do that."
Yeah.
I did. But to be fair, I only had I had 4 weeks notice to prepare for that show. I think for the Arnolds you need more than that. I did okay on a couple of events, but I felt like I was under prepared.
It was like 4 overhead events in that competition.
Not 4.
Wasn't it 4? What was the opponent's wheel?
So there's the pole axle, which is clean and press overhead, and there was a dumbbell.
And there was a log.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, there was a few. A couple of years after, there was a format change. It was 19 guys in the lineup.
It was crazy.
It was crazy, and you and Terry were the heavy favourites.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on beforehand at this competition, which distracted a lot of athletes. So it was, it kind of had it was a weird atmosphere in the arena.
Someone was taken extremely ill, weren't
Yeah,
they?
a heart attack, and
Was it in the because
it was a British Open with Britain's Strongest Man involved.
Yeah, so the top Brits would be crowned Britain's Strongest Man, but there were a couple of
there was a few internationals including Jerry Pritchett, who was second.
And Robert Oberst as well.
Oberst was in it as well, and I won.
You did win.
I won the overall competition and won Britain's Strongest Man.
Can you remember who was third?
Terry?
Yeah. Oh, come on, lovely.
Yeah, that was a good battle between me and Terry that year.
Yeah,
he beat me on the yoke. Very few people managed to beat me on the yoke at that time, and he beat me on the yoke. But I won the competition, so it was alright.
You also pulled the British deadlift
I did. I
record
pulled the
that
British
day.
deadlift record that day.
433 kilos. Yeah.
And I beat Robert Oberst on the log.
Oh God, I can't cope. Oh, and also, this was the first time we met Luke Stoltman.